Okay. Everybody good?
Yay.
Welcome back to Worldhoppers, a collaborative YouTube channel where all of the AdSense revenue gets to go to charity along with merch sales. So there's merch links down below with cute narwhals and things if you want to do that. There are quite a few new people today that I don't know have been on Worldhoppers previously. So if you guys just want to introduce yourselves, go for it. Who wants to start?
We usually go, let's see, I have to get the order this way, down, and then back around.
So Audrey first.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Folks may know me as Adri. My channel is Perpetual Pages here on YouTube. I've been doing YouTube since 2013, so going on 9 years this November. And I read pretty much everything, so from any genre, any age range, any demographic. So Angela's nodding. Yes, it's true. This checks out. As far as my identities, I'm a queer, trans, non-binary, Mexican-American book reviewer, writer, YouTuber, other things in life. So that's me in a nutshell.
I'm just going to pass it along.
Yeah. Angela's been here.
Hi everyone, I'm Lana from the booktube channel Lore and Lullabies. I've been on booktube for about 2 years, lingering around many more years than that. I suck at these intro things. That's essentially me.
What kind of
like a cool readathon you run, like in July?
Oh yeah, in July I run the Indie Accords Readathon, where it's just a month dedicated to reading self-pub and indie books. And this year is round 2, and we have some awesome authors that have come along and doing giveaways. And I designed this shirt. It just says I read indie and has a book, but I'm adding that to the giveaway as well. So yeah. That's me.
All right, g'day mates. My name is Chris and I'm from the channel A Fictional Escapist. If you can't tell by the nasal in my accent, I'm from Australia. I am an FTM trans man and also identify as bisexual. I've been on the platform for about 6 months now, and I mainly focus on indie and self-pub fantasy, but dabble in traditional publishing as well. And I also run some writing and productivity sprints for the authors in my little group, so we can all keep on top of our works in progress.
Yay.
Yay. I think that's everybody. So with that, we'll kind of just start with our first prompt. And since this is kind of in honor of Pride Month, we'll start with a nice, lovely, happy prompt. So your favorite LGBT plus rep in books. So I think we'll come to Elle and me last, so we'll go ahead and pass it. I will try. Adri? I tried to roll it.
It's okay. Well, I have a lot of answers for this, but I mean, my top 2 right now would probably be, of course, Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. It would be against my brand if I didn't bring this up. So because it's about a trans Mexican-American brujo. So like that would be wild of me. Or a Latina brujo. So it would be very wild for me not to talk about this. But yeah, in case anyone doesn't know, this is a queer paranormal rom-com, as the author likes to pitch it as. It's about a young brujo who wants to be a brujo, but his family won't let him go through with the ceremony, so he decides to do it himself. And then when he tries to summon a soul for the first time, he accidentally summons the hot school bad boy. So if that's your thing, please read it if you haven't yet. And then the other one I wanted to talk about is a recent favorite. You might have seen me talking about it on Instagram if you follow me on Instagram, but it's Exodus 23 by Fredes Moon, which is an indie queer novella about a queer trans Mexican-American man who is a sort of reformed delinquent trying to do his community service by rebuilding a local church. And he ends up falling in love with one of God's original creations. And like my personal tagline for this is that it healed my religious trauma. So you should definitely read this. It's a dark adult fantasy novella, so keep that in mind. But those are 2 that I thought I should mention for sure.
So maybe quite different from the wholesome Cemetery Boys.
Yes, quite.
I'm about to say, when Cemetery Boys came out, about how many video did you like put it in?
I mean, I still put it in videos to this day, so I don't know if we can count.
I would always giggle every time you like change the editing to be like the black and white when you're like, of course, we're back to Cemetery Boys.
Yes, I get ridiculed regularly for
I mean,
it,
it's
but
a
I'm not
very
gonna
good
stop.
book.
Yeah,
It's like the only book my siblings read since reading Percy Jackson. That's how good that book is.
exactly.
I've
That's a
seen
testament to it.
a lot of people didn't end up liking Lost in the Neverwoods. I know it's very different.
Mhm.
But the end of Lost in the Neverwoods almost made me cry. There's some things in
Absolutely.
between where I was like, some pacing things or just decisions of the characters, but the ending was one of those things where as soon as I read that, I was like, well, now I need to read basically everything they write because I thought that was so moving.
Yeah, devastating.
I'm just going to follow Audrey's lead and do 2, even though I have a bunch, but I'm just going to try and fit them into every prompt that Rodger brings up and just keep talking about a lot of books. And both of these are actually high epic fantasy, which before like 4 years ago, I feel like an adult, we haven't been getting a lot of riches, but we've been getting some good stuff. And one I'll bring up is Ruin of Kings, the entire Course of Dragons, which has currently been my brand the last like 4 months. I mean, what representation is not in this book is really the question. So you don't get a lot of it maybe in the first book because you're in a part of the world that is probably more synonymous with our like European Western backstory. But in the second book, we're in Jorat, which is a whole nation where gender identity is not based off how you are born. So you kind of come into it based off gender roles. So one of our main characters is probably by our definition trans, although in this world it has different words. We have polyamory, we have bisexuality, we have asexuality. Like there's just so much in it. And like that's not the thing I love the most about it, but it's just like if you want an LGBTQ inclusive high epic fantasy that doesn't hold back on everything you love about high epic fantasy, and it doesn't fall into like the harmful tropes of like this character is just here to be the representation to then be killed off or something like that. Like this just has representation that feels really good, but also just they are stunning characters in their own right, and I love them. So also the narrations for this book, they're so good. The audiobooks are really good. And then my second one is Rook and Rose series. So this world is very LGBTQ friendly. It's never assumed what anyone's sexual orientation or gender identity is. There are trans characters. One of my favorite characters in this is definitely pansexual, and I love him with my entire being. Vargo is everything. So that's definitely something I've really liked about it. And just like, it's just, there's a lot of tension in this world. There's a lot of drama in this world, but it's not going to be centered around your LGBTQ status. Like that's not what's happening here. And I love it. This is one of my favorite. This was my brand in 2021. This has been my brand in 2022. So
Did you, I forget, have you picked up the sequel yet?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And so also, like, so this is 2 authors, Marie Brennan, who does The Natural History of Dragons, and Alice Helm, who is non-binary, or at least uses they, them pronouns. And we keep saying on the internet, all of us fans, like, you could just make a throuple. Like, there's not really a love triangle, but like, we could just commit to a throuple. And they keep winking at us, so I like really hope that happens. So there's not actual polyamory on the page, I think, for Rook and Rose like there is in Course of Dragons. But I'm hopeful. I'm truly hopeful. Because that is the preferred form of love triangle for me. So.
I feel like the problem with everybody else, basically, except for Rodger going before me, is there's a chance that things I might say will happen first. I'm like, dang it.
You weren't going to say Ruin of Kings.
I definitely wasn't going to say Ruin of Kings because I didn't care for it. But I did really like Mask of Mirrors, so I'm gonna read Liar's Knot with Joanna soon, or that's the plan.
No, I can't wait to reread them. We finally got a name for the 3rd book, but I don't think it's coming out till August of next year, and it hurts me.
Oh, I mean, they did have the first 2 come out the same year, which is intense.
I mean, I don't actually mind because I was going to reread them anyways because I love them, but I just want the 3rd book. That's all.
What was the title for it?
The Labyrinth something. I can't remember the last word of it.
Oh, sorry,
something.
that's a cool title.
Anything with the labyrinth.
Yes. All
right, I've talked long enough, Lana. It's your turn.
I'm so glad that you brought up the Ruin of Kings because that was going to be one of mine, and Symmetry Boys was also going to be one of mine. So I will say I absolutely love this one.
Nice.
The Song of Achilles. Everyone loves it. It's just heartbreaking and beautiful, and it's just amazing.
Not everybody loves it because I
Stop
think
it, Rodger.
Elle's just wrong. It's fine. The Song of Achilles is great.
Yes.
I thought the writing was really beautiful.
And the other one that I have, actually, I have lots. I'm going to go with this one because I haven't heard it mentioned very
I've
much.
seen that cover around.
Oh my gosh, the blur is killing me. But The Witch King by H.E. Edgman. I got this sent to me by a friend and we're reading it for a book club. And it's about, oh, hang on, sorry, my daughter's like yelling at me.
Come on now. Mom's trying to record.
The lack of respect. But yeah, so this is a urban fantasy, I guess, about a trans fae, and it's it's really good. I suck at explaining things, but it is so good. Please read it. And I liked the representation in it, and also I was in love with the main love interest, who's also a fae with horns and wings, and it just did everything for me.
Audrey, did you read that one? I feel like I've seen it on your Instagram.
I most certainly read that one. I know I read that one, but I actually interviewed H.E. Edgman on my channel, so you can actually check that out if you would like to. But if I can just say what it's about, just so people get a better idea, because people absolutely need to read it. It's about a trans witch who was raised in this fairy world where witches are openly persecuted by fairies. And he was betrothed to the fairy prince as a child, but then he escaped to the human world to try to get away from that persecution and then transitioned as a man. And so he figured, oh, like the betrothal is null now. But then his fairy prince fiance comes to the human world and tries to convince him to come back, saying that they need to solidify their marriage to protect the throne from a growing threat. So it's very good. It's written by an Indigenous trans author. The main character is trans, like I said. The love interest is demisexual and sort of like gender fluid or gender nonconforming. So it's incredibly good. It's incredibly good.
So you're saying it's marriage of convenience? Is that the trope?
Ish, yeah. They don't actually get married,
Okay.
but yeah, they have this sort of like marriage contract that's kind of going on between them.
Did you have another book, Lana, or was that your main one?
That was like my main one, and also little person, so I'm just going to mute myself.
Very cute little person.
All right. Well, not to bring up another series that Elle didn't vibe with, but the Tide Child trilogy, starting with The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker, has one of my favorite LGBTQIA plus reps ever written, and it's done so well over the entire trilogy. Now, this is nautical fantasy, which isn't everyone's cup of tea. The first book is quite hard to get through in terms of getting used to language, but the concept of sea dragons is rad, so should definitely check this one out if you can go through the first book. And I'm a self-professed robot. The finale of these books made me cry as I was walking to work, and then had to explain why I was crying as I walked to work. But the rep in these books, there's a character called Alarin, and they are the courser. So they set the courses for these ships to go on to find these dragons. And it's never specified throughout the series how they identify, and it's sort of up to the reader to, I guess, think of it for themselves, but they go by they, them pronouns, and I read them as agender and asexual, and they have this amazing character arc, and it's never sort of questioned as to why they identify this way. It's just they are who they are. And the main character Joran and Alarin have this really special bond that grows with the series, and Alarin starts to open up to Joran as we get through to the end of the book, and they become quite important to each other by the end. And I just think it was so well done, and the authenticity of the relationship throughout the three books was really beautiful throughout the entire series, if you can make it to that third book. So that's probably my favorite LGBTQIA plus rep that I've ever read, done in that authentic way. And I have a stack of books like everyone else here, but I will just go with one more. Repping the bisexual team, we have Dreams of the Dying. This is by Nicholas Lietzow. And the main character, Jesper, is a bisexual man. And I think bisexuality can be done quite tropey in a promiscuous way, which I don't like. We'll get to that later. But this book, he never sort of says that, and there are relations with both a male and a female throughout the course of this book, but it's not to the point where I'm just going to sleep with who I want because I'm bi. It feels authentic, and he doesn't feel the need to share it with everyone. He's like, I am who I am, and I don't really feel the need to explain that. And I thought that was really nice for me as a bi person to read that represented.
Nice. I've heard really good things about that one. Really, really good. I think Petrick, because Petrick's read everything, I think Petrick Leo has given that one quite high praise. Because I know we have other prompts, so there's a part of me that's like, oh, so many of the ones I like can fit in so many of these different prompts. But a book that, since there seems to be a thing of us being on brand, and this is the one, Angela, I was afraid you were going to say, but Vintage from the
I saved it for you purposely, but also
Thank you. So this is also epic fantasy, really intense epic fantasy. The beginning of the story, you're going to probably be confused. I feel like everybody has heard me talk about it, but to try to sum it up really quickly, there was a magical tree that this race of people called Eborans would drink the sap of, and it's what gave them their near immortality. When they lost that, I guess you could say, resource, because this tree started to die, then they turned to human blood, which caused this it caused this illness that has killed most of them. But it's important their race survives because there is a threat that seems to be looming. And if that threat returns, they're the only group of people that knows how to fight back. And so you have a lot of different fantasy groups that are kind of butting heads. And Vintage is a human. She's basically like, I've described her as Indiana Jones, but a lesbian Black woman. And she's amazing. I absolutely love her. And she is just very sassy, but she puts everybody in their place because the other characters are very high maintenance and sometimes they're very moody. And she's always just like, whatever, my dear, or my darling. And she's just always kind of sassing them. And she's like the mom of the group, but also the leader of the group. And she's amazing. And I love her. And she has such a sad arc in a very personal way in the story, because there's a character that you grow to hate that she's associated with, because you're like, you should treat her better because she is precious. So I really love Vintage. And then I wanted to mention, because I know, Angela, you were talking about the way that sometimes there's this, how things are in these fantasy worlds, like how they determine things. It's not just assumed. I thought in Winter's Orbit, the way that it's like their accessories help people. Yeah. Oh, if you wear, I think it's if you're wearing a certain material like wood, it will tell you like this is their pronouns or things like that. So just a different way. That one is, it's a murder mystery marriage of convenience. And the two main characters I thought were really cute with each other. So these two men come together, and one of them clearly has had something traumatic happen in the past. And the other one is so sweet and so patient, which I really liked, because I think a lot of times publishing, talking about the pet peeves we'll get to later, publishing likes to push sad narratives when it comes to certain kinds of relationships, and it doesn't always want to show the happy, sweet ones. And so I thought with these two characters, the patience they had for each other and the getting to know each other was really organic and cute, but also the exploration of trauma I thought was done quite well in that. So I wanted to mention that one. And then Black Sun. I didn't love Fevered Star. I'm kind of nervous about where the series is going, but I loved the first book. So I'm just going to say those three for now.
Also, back to Vintage real quick. If you've read Natural History of Dragons, it's like Vintage and Isabella Trent would be best friends. They have the same energy. Like, they're not the same person, but they would have tea together and they would go on adventures together, and I would be here for it. So anyway, because I just know the Natural History of Dragons series is more popular than Ninth Ring. I'm so jealous of your copy. I did bring mine over just in case. But
I just got it. Oh my gosh. Luna Bear helped me unbox it.
If we're sticking on brand, can you guess what I'm going to mention then, Elle? What is the series that I talk about all the time? Laura K. Hamilton, Anita Blake. There is a polycule at the center of the story, especially later on. There is male, 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 female, 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 male, 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 all of it. Body parts everywhere, limbs everywhere. Good times. But it is... Did I do a good job of selling it?
I just like, you're just so good at selling books. That's all. Continue.
I was going to say, you're such an interesting combination of you'll say certain things so easily, and then other things you're super wholesome and like filter yourself. Because the other day Rodger was texting me about something else he read, and he said this author likes to use a lot of "see you next Tuesday." Like I'm like, well, I appreciate you maybe wanting to not put that word out to one of your lady friends, but also given like some of the other things you say.
So Anita Blake is urban fantasy. Especially early on, it kind of starts as like murder mystery urban fantasy. There's like a crime happening at the start of every novel that you kind of follow Anita Blake. She is an animator who raises things from the dead for a living. And this is a world kind of, it started before True Blood, but it's very a la True Blood, where vampires have just been made legal citizens in the United States. And our prison system is not capable of keeping them under control. So she's also a legally sanctioned vampire executioner for when they commit crimes. And eventually she meets a vampire and may or may not fall in love, and then falls in love with 50 other people, and it's wonderful. And then I guess...
Oh, sorry.
What was that?
I was
going to show it.
If anyone else has read Iron Widow. Yeah. I know that a lot of people really like that one. Sorry, Rodger.
The other one that I was going to mention is a new release that just came out that Jashana also loves, and that would be The Final Strife by Sarah El Arifi. And that one I loved because the representation, it's not the like almost trauma porny kind of representation we get a lot of times. These people are just, there are trans people, there are the main character. I'm not sure if she's bi or pan, but there is a male, there's a male relationship as well as a female relationship later on. And it's not a problem in this society. They're not being oppressed for it. They are just living their lives. People are oppressed for other reasons, but that's the color of their blood. Because in the Final Strife, the setup is there are 3 different classes of people. There are the Embers, which have red blood. There are the, I can't remember, the Dusters, who have blue blood. And then there are the Ghostings, which have clear. And the Ghostings are kind of like slaves and seen not as people. And at some point in the ancient past, they did some kind of uprising. So their hands are amputated at pretty much birth and their tongues are cut out. And it's kind of a rebellion against evil empire story that expands much more later on. So those will be my 2 that I'll talk about. So we'll just keep going with the love fest. So the next question is your most anticipated release with LGBT rep. And we'll just keep chugging. So no, not that way.
Well, I've quite a few again, but I'll try to boil it down to a couple. The first one, obviously, that comes to mind is the Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas, which is coming out later this year. And it's set in a queer normative world inspired by Mexican-American culture. So it's got this like Mexican-American inspired pantheon of gods that I'm very excited about. And a lot of them are queer. And it's like a bunch of teen semi-dioses, which are basically like demigods, who are like in this battle to the death where it will end with one of them being sacrificed. So like, I'm very excited about that one. Another one I'm excited about is called The Bruising of Qilwa by Nassim Jamnia, which is written by a queer trans non-binary Persian author. And it's also set in a queer normative Persian inspired world. And it follows a non-binary refugee doctor who encounters a magical plague in their new home and has to use forbidden magic to find the culprit. So I'm very excited about that one. And then I'm also excited about The Unbalancing by R.B. Lemberg. This is the first book, which is not the first book. It's part of the Birdverse overall, which is, and this one's called The Four Profound Weaves, but like The Unbalancing is the first like full length novel in the Birdverse. And it's a companion to this or continuation of this, however you want to see it, written by a queer bigender immigrant from Eastern Europe. And the tagline is that new love blossoms between an impatient starkeeper and a reclusive poet as they try to work together to save their island home. So I'm very excited about that. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very, very queer.
my first one, I don't have a copy, obviously, but it's the sequel to Jasmine Throne. I think this comes out in August. Oleander Sword. It's green. It's sapphic. The end of this book demands the sequel, so I'm excited to reread this and get to the Oleander Sword because, I mean, I remember a lot of this, but there are just so many wonderful moments of like why I read epic fantasy in this book. So I'm just like really excited and like, yeah. Another one, Neon Yang has a space opera coming out. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Some Genesis Mercy or something like that. I can't remember the name, but it's
called The Genesis of Misery. It's
Genesis of Misery. And that cover looks amazing. And I've only read the first novella in the Tenseret series. And I liked that a lot, but I didn't love it. But it had me like intrigued enough to be like, you have very good ideas as an author, and I want to see you in novel space. And I'm very excited. And Sarah Gailey, I don't think this book might be, I don't know if this book itself is going to be gay, but Sarah Gailey is non-binary, and I'm excited. I think it's like a horror haunted house book that might be coming out by them. And I'm very, I mean, after reading The Echo Wife last year, I'm just like, yes, anytime you want to be in that space, because I've read other Sarah Gailey that doesn't land with me, but it seems like if they're doing, yeah, that's the Neon Yang one that I'm very excited about. And yeah, the Sarah Gailey one, I can't remember the name of it. Has a weird melting house on it, Home. It's called Just Like Home, I think. And every time Sarah Gailey decides to try and write like a thriller or a horror, I think I'm going to try it out because I think that's the genre I like their brain the most. So those are my short list.
So for me, my like main one is the Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas. I love the style of writing, so that's like my main selling point, because even though I wasn't a huge fan of Lost in the Neverwoods, again, that ending, just like the start was good, and then the writing in the middle, it was just like it had a pacing issue for me, but the actual writing itself, I was like, I am probably going to pick up everything like that they write. So that is like my top, and then the rest are just continuations. I'm just trying to look at my list. I think they've already been said. Yeah, I'm gonna pass to Chris.
Thanks. Well, we get things a little bit later here in Australia, so I'm looking forward to the Final Strife after hearing Rodger and Joshana both gush about it. These queer normative, tales are something that I'm not super familiar with, where it's just not a thing, and they're always really nice to come across. So I'm looking forward to that one. I'm also looking forward to A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. Male romance between a bodyguard and a prince. So I'm interested in that one for science mainly.
I'm not laughing at you, Chris. I'm laughing at me because when you said male romance, I sat here and went.
No, I'm laughing at Chris. I'm
laughing out. Yeah, I thought that was funny.
I'm laughing, and you guys are so mean.
No,
it's funny because there's like two scientists in this group, so
I've seen that cover, and every time I see it, I always think, what's that? I mean, it sounds like it makes me hungry, but I mean, it looks interesting. That's the cover, if anybody. And look at this cover. Anyway, sorry.
We should definitely look at the other cover.
The other cover's better.
Although, like, I don't know why, but this the pretty man kind of gives me like Giselle vibes, and I don't know why. From like the first law, I don't know. Maybe I just pictured Giselle as a pretty man.
Oh, that's funny. I think of him as very frat boy kind of a look. Like not that all frat guys are, but there's like this image that comes to mind of like tan, blonde. I feel like I'm just describing
salmon shorts. Yeah.
Yes, or like the bro tank. That's what I just think of Giselle, but then in a more medieval-esque setting, I was looking like that.
You've just described half of Australia, so.
You're also describing frat boys from like 2013. Who even knows if that's relevant now? Like,
that's true.
I'm also looking forward to What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher.
Gosh darn it.
So sorry. I wasn't going to say it because I knew you just read, was it Nettle and Bone?
Yes,
By
so
P.
good.
Kingfisher. But I have a couple of things by that author that I haven't read yet, but this has like an NB main character, and I'm really looking forward to that just being more normalized in fiction in general. So looking forward to that as well.
I will say a book Rodger and I we didn't buddy read, but we chatted about it. That has that, it's just a thing, is City of Dusk. I know it's been hit or miss with a lot of people, but I just thought I'd throw that one out there for one that has, where that's just not, it's not like people are persecuted or again that, oh, look how sad sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. Did you have another one you were going to mention?
No, those three are my main ones.
I also am very excited for What Moves the Dead. I have, by the way, Angela, I just wanted to show you, I had this next to me, but you took it first. I loved Griff in Flamefall, and I love this series, Fireborn. Everybody knows the Aurelian Cycle. The third one is scheduled to come out very soon in August, and I'm not sure I'm ready, but it's basically if the Russian Revolution had dragons. That's a quick synopsis there. It technically just came out, but it was an anticipated release of mine that I'm hoping to get to here in the next week or two, which would be the Ballad of Perilous Graves. And that one, because I haven't picked it up just yet, I can't really obviously talk about too much of what it's about and if I end up really loving it or not. But the idea is it's like, what if music was magic? And I think it's very much inspired by New Orleans. And as somebody who went to school for music, I am just excited to see. I'm very always kind of hesitant when there is music in books, because then I know that I'm going in with an accidental too harsh eye, and I try to, because I know V.E. Schwab, who wrote The Savage Song and Our Dark Duet, there's a part where a character is playing the violin and then just every string starts snapping, and it's this very intense moment. I'm like, that wouldn't happen like that. But I'm like, it's okay. I'm not going to be that person.
I think you'll be okay. I've read it, and the music is definitely a part of it, but not the technical side. It's definitely more about like the folk history, and lyrics is actually, I think, a stronger focus of it than actual music playing of instruments and things like that. Okay. I was in New Orleans when I read it, and I mean, it's not a perfect book for me, but like, yes, it was New Orleans. Like that was like, I actually picked a place to go eat based off of a place that was mentioned in the book. It was really cool. Fun. Yeah, no, that's a good one. And I really liked Casey, who is the trans main character. Well, he's basically one of the main characters in the book. He's very good. Casey's my favorite character in that book.
Yay. Well, that makes me excited. So those ones, I'll say.
Okay, so obviously I'm also looking forward to the Sunbearer Trials because I did read and enjoy Cemetery Boys. And A Taste of Golden Iron is obviously also here, but the one that nobody else has mentioned, that I'll mention, is Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chipeco. It's supposed to be queer romance, gothic, epic fantasy. So it's vampire hunters, and I believe like one of the main characters is from like a vampire hunter family, and there's this new terrifying breed of vampire that shows up outside of their city, and he goes to investigate and falls into like vampire court politics, it sounds like. And I've never read Rin Chipeco before. I know she has that Bone Witch trilogy or whatever it is, but I'm excited to check this one out.
That cover's really cool.
Yeah,
also, I just want to say that I forgot about N.K. Jemisin, but I'm excited to meet Bronca again. Bronca's amazing. So that's all. I know not everyone likes The City We Became because everyone's wrong, but Bronca's amazing.
So let's see. Up next is your favorite openly LGBT plus author.
Yes. As usual, I have an entire list. I mean, I should just say Aiden Thomas obviously is at the top of the list. Again, it would be kind of obscene if I didn't mention them because we're basically the same exact person except for our astrology charts. Like, we're basically the same person. So it would be bizarre for me not to mention them. They're not an SFF writer, but I also want to say Johnny Gazavia is one of my favorite openly queer authors because they're also non-binary Chicana Mexican author who is amazing. And if you love contemporary, especially contemporary romance, you should definitely check out their books. In terms of fantasy, I also really like F.T. Lukens, who is a non-binary author. Pretty much everything they do, they kind of specialize in like satirical queer YA fantasy. So if their stuff is really fun and inventive and imaginative, I just love their little bizarre brain, and I think they're fantastic. And then I also really like A.M. McLemore, who is another YA magical realism author. That's kind of their niche is magical realism. They are a queer, non-binary, bigender, Mexican-American author, and they're fantastic. So pretty much they're doing stuff that really no one else is doing. So if you want like a unique author with a really unique perspective and just brilliant imagination, A.M. McLemore is pretty much second to none. And then another author that I really liked or found recently for myself is R.M. Virtues, who is a queer, Afro-Latina, Indigenous romance author, indie romance author. And so I recently read his book, Drag Me Up. I read it for the Queer Romance Readathon because it was the group book, and it was so good. It's like a modern day Hades Persephone retelling where Persephone is a Black trans woman and Hades is a demisexual queer man. It's great. It's fantastic. Highly recommend. And then my other author who I will read anything they write is Yoon-Ha Lee, who is like, come at me, fight me. You're going to be wrong about everything Yoon-Ha Lee writes, because I know a lot of people love to hate their books, but you're wrong, and it's okay if you're wrong, but I won't accept you. So anything Yoon-Ha Lee writes, gold.
Audrey took two of mine, so I'm just going to piggyback off A.M. McLemore, especially. So I'm someone who traditionally reads, that's like a lot of adult SFF. I will read anything A.M. McLemore writes. It does not matter that it's in young adult because, first of all, if it's young adult, so is Uprooted. Like they're the same level in terms of like density of writing, how it feels, like the lyrical prose, like, and it's the same age of characters normally. Maybe they're a little younger. I've only read Blanca y Roja and Dark and Deepest Red, and everyone thinks Dark and Deepest Red is like their weakest, and that's like my favorite. But whenever I want a standalone, darker book that I just can read in 2 or 3 days, like they're perfect for like, I've read one in the summer to get away. One is like a fall read I'm going to recommend to everyone. And then yes, Yoon-Ha Lee is everything. Like Yoon-Ha Lee's trans. And I just learned on the internet that General Jadao was supposed to be trans, but Yoon-Ha Lee was scared and didn't think people wanted that. And I'm upset because it would have made so much sense.
I'm going to push back on that, though, because technically there is a lot of trans stuff happening in Ninefox Gambit, even though it's not explicitly trans.
That's
because
true.
For anyone who doesn't know, it's about like a disgraced starship captain who is like blamed for like using unfair tactics against this war against the heretics. And so as punishment, she has to like take on the undead soul of this murderous tactician in her own body. So it's like that idea of like literally looking in the mirror and seeing someone else of a different gender look back at you is very, very trans. So if though I know, but like, and there's a lot of interesting stuff with gender as well, but I know I'm not like pushing back against what you said, but just like in general, there's a lot of trans ideas in the Ninefox Gambit.
For sure. And like, even I think the thing that was brought up on Twitter by the author was like, that was why there was intentional scarring on the character as well. Like there is a lot of subtext. It's not text. But I love General Jadao with my entire being. And this entire trilogy, it's all 3 books together, shorter than a Stormlight Archive. And people get so scared of it. And I don't know why. Like, I really love it. Another author that, I mean, it might not be a favorite yet, but I ate this book up, and that's The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, and I'll read anything C.L. Clarke writes. Like, for a debut, I was, like, blown away. I was reading my arc of this, and then at, like, the halfway point, went to the bookstore to buy it, and of course, I'm like, of course it's Orbit. I can't get a hardback, but whatever. And so I got the paperback, and I know the second book has already been drafted, and I'm just, like, waiting to find out when it'll happen. Terrain's everything. Terrain has amazing arms. If you are into arms, Terrain is great. I love Terrain. So it has a very messy relationship. This whole book's mess, actually. There's nothing not messy about The Unbroken. Like, it's a dusty city with rebellion and colonialism and power dynamics that are flawed. It's all mess, and I love it, and I can't wait to see where the second book goes. I think it's a trilogy, I think. And Magic of the Lost. It even has like Orbit does with the numbers. But so C.L. Clarke's just definitely one of those like new authors that I really vibed with the writing style, and that's like the most exciting thing for me and authors. Rodger, did you want to read what Lana wrote?
So Lana had to leave because her tiny human is being a tiny human. But her answers are Rin Chapeko, Mark Timoney, which I think Chris grabbed the book so he can talk more about that because I haven't read it yet. It's what I'm reading next. And then Thomas Howard Riley. I don't know who that is, but maybe Chris does.
Lana just throwing me under the bus. That's all good. So Mark Timony is actually a buddy of mine because he basically stalked me and then I stalked him and then we became friends. And he wrote Blood of the Spear, which came out, it was his debut novel last year, I think it was. And he's an openly gay author, and where he's one of the people that is working with me on these writing sprints. So he's writing his second book on the writing sprints, and I'm writing my first novella and novel while we're doing it. So really cool guy. If you like high epic fantasy, so this reads like Steven Erikson wrote The Wheel of Time, is the best way to describe it. So it's so it's very complex.
Just got Angela like.
Angela's brain has just exploded, and I apologize. But it's quite dense.
You're gonna have to tell me which parts of which are where.
I'm not reading the series. I'm just going off somebody else's.
Well, Steven Erikson has a very, very
So is it dense? Like, is it densely written? Okay, so
Yeah,
it's densely written like Erikson, but does it at least make sense? And does it meander? Does it have flawed character gender identities like Wheel of Time?
It does, yes.
So that's just cool. They're both epic, and I just like can't even.
And they're so different. And Thomas Howard Riley is someone fairly new on the scene. They're a self-published author, and their debut was We Break Immortals, I believe it's called, and it's a chunk of a book to the point where I've shelved it as intimidating, and I haven't picked it up quite yet, but looking forward to it. My favorite open LGBT author, I can't say Mark, because he's already been said. One I haven't read anything from yet, but I admire and respect a whole hell of a lot, is V.E. Schwab. Sorry, Elle, do you want to go before me next time?
I'll just really quick. I was pulling up the other book you mentioned just so that everybody can see the cover.
Oh, okay.
The intimidating one.
That looks cool.
I was just because there are a lot of authors that I think are, fantasy. They're getting better about diversity. I feel like fantasy is always a little behind a lot of other genres, especially adult fantasy. I feel like is behind young adult. But V.E. Schwab, I know she's super popular. I know so many people have seen and read something by her. But I just like how she's very, this is who I am. And if you don't like it, too bad. And I've just always appreciated that about her. I went to, before she really blew up, she did a kind of a little chat at my local bookstore, and I got to meet her briefly, had my book signed and stuff. And it was really interesting because at the time, I think she considered herself bisexual, but then now I think is just a lesbian. But either way, I remember her talking about specifically how people would tell her that they were angry that the character who is bisexual in Shades of Magic, how they were like, oh, well, they're a flawed character. And that people got mad at her for writing. And she's like, I write my characters as human beings. Like, and I just have always loved that she's kind of feisty. So I've always really respected. And I've read so many of her works and liked so many. And also she's had a lot of issues with when her career first started. A lot of people now just think of how successful she is, and they don't realize how difficult it was for her because she had this situation where the Archive series, I think it's called, where she wrote some and then the publisher held on to it, but then wouldn't print more because they were like, well, the series isn't selling well enough for us, and they wouldn't put more out. When she wrote Vicious, she always intended it to be a trilogy. And then it was kind of another like, well, we'll see, which does happen. She's not the only person that's happened to, but that's why Vicious was written kind of like a standalone. And then when the sequel came out, I felt bad. We're accusing her of just trying to get money out of it and stuff. And I'm like, it's sad because I remember years ago seeing her speak and talk about she'd always wanted this to be 3 books. And so she's had to push through being mistreated by fellow authors, trying to break through some things in fantasy and having, I'm sure people say really terrible things to her because she's a woman in fantasy, because she's openly queer. And so I just think it's cool that she's been able to kind of push through all of those things. But it also makes me sad that she's had to, Anyway, sorry, Chris, for
No, that's okay. You were much more eloquent than I was going to be. I was like, she's here, she's queer, and there's no apologies. And I just love that about her. And her Instagram, she's very open and honest about the writing and the process of writing and the anxieties that come with working on so many things at one given time. And I just really, really like their openness quite a bit. Another one that is not SFF, but I admire, and I've only read their poetry collection and have one on order, is Akwaeke Emezi. And I think they also write a little bit in magical realism, but just how raw and open they are about their works. The poetry collection that's coming out in July is called Content Warning Everything. And if it takes a lot of guts to be able to put yourself out there like that and be so open and so ready to receive criticism, but also just be honest for people who might not be able to be so visible is something amazing. And I really admire that as well.
Yeah, Akwaeke Emezi, what genre don't they write in? They're just astounding. Also, that reminded me, because I forgot to grab my copy of it, River Solomon's another amazing author that I will read anything that they write. I read all the things that have been published, and all of them, I mean, have been at least 4 stars to like, I mean, Saruland for me is the perfect combination of like literary, thematic, engaging, thrilling. Like most people can only do one of those things. You have like a literary dense work that's like meaningful, but maybe you didn't enjoy your experience reading it. This is like a thriller page turner, but also was so good and creepy and cool. So River Solomon.
Definitely a genre bender because it is sort of fantasy, sort of horror, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Yeah, I've stopped subcategorizing fantasy for a while, and I've just been speculative because once I started reading more non-white authors, they all just genre blend. Like me, even N.K. Jemisin. Like no one, I don't know, everyone just decides because publishing makes it so hard anyways. They just put together the story they want to tell, and publishers have to figure it out on their own. So at least that's been my experience so far.
Rodger,
So was that your only one, Al?
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to keep talking about her because I love her. So I grabbed more of her books. So, Ms. Laurel, she is, I'm not totally sure what she identifies as. I know she's in a polyamorous relationship. She has a husband, and they have been in a long-term committed relationship with another couple as well. I don't know what she identifies as, but she also has the best like author photos on her books. So I've already talked about Anita. So we'll talk about Mary Gentry. So this is, if you like evil fae, they don't get much more evil than this. The queen of the Unseelie fae literally will like torture her subjects because she rules by fear. So she'll literally like, they are all immortal. So she'll cut out their intestines and like stand on them to cause them pain until they'll, as like penance for things that they did if they disobey her. So like if you want evil, messed up fae, you're welcome.
But is it as dark as Sarah J. Maas? Is it?
way more. I haven't read the fae stuff yet. I guess it's all kind of fae, but I haven't
just read a Throat of Glass.
That's nothing compared to this.
I know. I was making a joke.
Ande's Queen of Darkness will probably give you nightmares because she's kind of messed up. And there's also really, I will say that these 2 books especially have some very interesting Bow Chicka Bow Wow times. There, especially in this one, there's like tentacles with suckers on the end, and that's all I'll say. But and then if you don't like Bow Chicka Bow Wow times, she has a brand new series that she just started that's much more focused on like the crime mystery type stuff. And so this is A Terrible Fall of Angels. And those 2 series are also very long. Anita Blake, I think, is up to almost book 30. And then Mary Gentry is up to book 9, and she plans to continue at some point. And then this is the only book out currently. So if you want to try Laurel but not commit to a 30-book series, you have A Terrible Fall of Angels. And she has really cool magic systems, which I think is what really draws me to her. Like with the Fae magic, it's all based on like hand magic. So one of the people has the hands of blood and flesh. So she can literally like, if she touches you, she can turn you inside out because she can control your flesh. She can call the blood from your body. There are all kinds. The Queen of Air and Darkness can basically control gravity and light. And then in this book, it's more like shamanistic type stuff. So there are angels, but they're not really like Christian angels. They're more these beings of like light and sound. And then there's like people can have different totems. So one person uses like a raccoon spirit as the focus for her magic. So that's a terrible fall of angels. And then besides Laurel, I also love me some TJ Klune. I know there may or may not be some things every once in a while with Mr. TJ Klune, but I recently read The House on the Cerulean Sea, and just like the sweet, slow burn male romance gave me all the feels. And so I'll throw him in there as well. And then we'll just keep chugging along. The next one we have is your fave LGBT rep in an adaptation.
I'm just going to throw out there that I do have a book adaptation to mention, but I'm going to be mentioning a couple other things that are not technically adaptations of books, but I have to mention because they're great.
Live your life. Live your best life.
But I'll hold off.
I might follow your lead there, because I actually struggled with this prompt, because I know we are getting a lot more book to screen adaptations, whether it's book to film or book to TV show or anything like that. But I don't think we're really having a lot of queer book adaptations on screen. So I struggled. Like, I was looking through pages and pages of articles of books that have been adapted into things on screen, and could not find anything that I liked or that was queer. So I'm going to kind of cop out here, because it's not SFF, but Heartstopper obviously is a recent adaptation that is literally Alice Oseman is doing God's work and giving us everything we wanted. Like, if you want just like a very soft queer series actually created by and for queer people that centers queer joy and acknowledges that queer people can face hardship and also experience happiness in equal full measures, like, that is the show to watch. And it's very rewatchable as well. So just if you haven't yet, I mean, I know everyone has pretty much seen Heartstopper, but if you haven't, I don't know why you're denying yourself happiness. The other thing, because Elle said that she was going to mention something was not a book adaptation, so I would like to say you should watch Our Flag Means Death on HBO Max if you haven't yet, because it is queer, hilarious, satirical, literal perfection in a show. So that's all I'm going to say. Also, Vico Ortiz is the love of my life. So
yeah, Our Flag Means Death is everything, like literally everything. Like, I could have just rewatched the pilot over and over again. Like, it gets better from there by like a lot, but the pilot itself was a warm hug that I truly desired. So I was struggling too, because like you said, we're getting a lot more adaptations, but not actually, like, none of the books we mentioned are getting adaptations yet. And so I was talking to my siblings. I'm like, I don't think the graphic novels were actually queer, but the show made them more queer, and that was Umbrella Academy. So Umbrella Academy has more representations that are approved by the creator of the graphic novels, but are not on page in the graphic novels. And then I kind of decided to take this prompt into what book would I like to see an adaptation of, just to talk about another book. So feel free, Audrey, after me to do that if you so desire. And I'm going to do the Texclon duology by Arcady Martin, because I want more sci-fi space opera, period, in my adaptation space, just in general as a sci-fi person. But this has one of my favorite sapphic relationships, because it's messy. It's like an incredibly messy relationship between Mahit and Three Seagrass. And also, I think this series is so smart, and a lot of people won't read it because it is dense. Like, it's not actually for everyone, but the second book has so many sci-fi tropes, and I think on screen, the adaptation can help make it more palatable for a wider audience, and more people can get like these characters and these themes in this world. Like, we just had the Foundation adaptation, which was not very good. And like, this could have been like a better thing. Like, if you're going to do like Empire, generational space opera. So I just wanted to talk about another representation I loved. And I love Three Seagrass and Mahit. They're great. So, Chris, that way. Or unless, Audrey, did you have a book you wanted to say that you wanted?
I can just to mention it in here. I don't even know if this necessarily fits the prompt. I just want to talk about it. And that's Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, which just recently came out. And it's a blend of dystopian and horror fiction about a trans boy who's trying to like desperately escape this religious extremist cult where he was raised his entire life. And that they have subjected him and so many others to like human experimentation to create them into monsters, basically. So now he's like trying to escape and also trying to hide this growing monster within him. And it is so good. I do actually think this would work great as a TV show, because it's so horrific and it's so intense. It's so fast paced that I think it would just be so great. There's so many great ideas in here. Andrew Joseph White is definitely a voice to watch. I would love to see that adapted.
Like everyone else, I also struggled, but because I don't really watch TV or movies, I tend to read and write in my spare time. But so I'm going to go a little bit personal, and it's not SFF. But when I was growing up as a young lesbian, Sarah Waters was very important to me. So I read a lot. So people who don't know who Sarah Waters is, she writes a lot of sapphic period dramas, basically. And Tipping the Velvet is a 3-part book, and we basically look at the different forms of love that people can have. So we have the first love, which is kind of tumultuous and not that great for her. We have the exciting love, which sort of opens you up to new experiences in the middle, and then we have the love, the nice love at the end. So when this got adapted, it was sort of my first foray into sapphic content, and then I consumed everything by Sarah Waters, and the adaptation meant a lot to me growing up, queer 10 years ago. And also Fingersmith was another one that was adapted by Sarah Waters, which I thought they were done really well and they were quite delightful. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. I know that there's a and I'm scared to say it because I think Elle might say it again. But Games 2 adaptation, Arcane.
Dang it!
Sorry.
I almost thought about Arcane too, but I'm like, if it's going to be mentioned, it's Elle, and I actually don't know if it's happening because it was very again a subtext, not text situation.
Right.
I just need more Vi and Caitlin in my life. I love it.
Yes. There's this artist. I'll maybe try to link them when before the video goes up. And there's a lot of books. When we're done, everybody wants to send me everything they talked about, so I can put that all in the description bar. But anyway, there's this artist who's amazing. They do great Witcher art. They do great Lara Croft art. And recently they've been doing tons of Arcane art. And I saw them talking about their obsession with Vi. And I was like, hey, me too. And then I saw that in the comments and stuff that apparently there's a term, because I'm like, oh, I'm not alone, called bisexual. And I'm like, I don't know what it is, but Vi just brings something out in us. I love Vi. Anyway, sorry.
No, that's it. I'm done.
Oh, okay. Well, I did want to say, because I know we've been sort of speaking this, and it was already mentioned too, how so many of the things that are done well in books are ones that are getting adaptation. But one that I think an adaptation is in the works, and that's really exciting, is Raybear. Which I really, really liked. I thought the themes in that were great. There's definitely a vibe of we're all kind of sometimes intimate with each other, even though they're supposed to not be really intimate with anybody. But there's this group of individuals who all sort of are there to protect this one person. And that person's supposed to eventually have children because it's through their powers that would be passed on through their children. And they don't feel attraction to other people in that way, and they're the biggest sweetheart of a character. They're not the main character. Tari Sai is the main character, but their friendship, Tari Sai and this other character's friendship, is precious, and it's arguably more, I would say, a focus than the actual romantic subplot, I guess, because the romance isn't a huge thing in that book or that duology. But yeah, I was like, it's so sweet because they're just so cute and understanding of each other. So I'm excited. That one's in the works. And then I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a character that's kind of a main character in the Witcher series that is bisexual. And so I'll be curious if the show ends up showing that, because that has become very popular. So I'm curious to see if Witcher will show that. I was going to say Jesper from Six of Crows. Jesper was not my favorite character in the series. Just in some of how they treated a certain family member of theirs and things, it kind of made me sad. But I still like how Leigh Bardugo wrote them. But that actor is so good and has brought that character to life. And I was like, dang. I mean, I really liked the Shadow and Bone adaptation anyway. I think a lot of people feel it's improved upon the story. but Jesper in that, I know that's kind of a specific character, so it's more focusing in on the rep, but I just thought that actor nailed it. So yeah, and then this is the other thing I was going to say. It's technically an adaptation of a movie, and then it's now a TV show, but What We Do in the Shadows is fantastic, and the humor is great, and nobody seems to mind anybody's tastes in that. So I love that show. And the 4th season's coming out very soon, and then it's been renewed for I think season 5 and 6. So that's really exciting. So that show is phenomenal and hilarious. And if you haven't watched it, it's great. And the actor who plays Guillermo is phenomenal. And it's funny because they're so different than their character in the show. Because their character in the show is very like polite, kind of quiet. And they're just very out, like very fabulous. And like they wear like such extravagant clothes, and they'll do cool hairstyles and stuff. And I just think it's fun. They're fun. And the cast all seems to really like each other, so that's always cute.
So I also love Jesper from the Shadow and Bone series. I like the series much better than I like the books. And I will still say that the King of Scars duology is better than Six of Crows, so on you, Al. I also really like Heartstopper. I have like a whole 30-minute gush video on my channel about why I love that show so much and why that kind of representation meant so much to me as a gay male. But the other one that I'll mention is Call Me By Your Name. It's not happy. It's very sad. But I found that movie because I am also a nationally certified Taekwondo referee. So I was away refereeing California State Championships, and my husband like texted me and was like, I'm just crying right now. And I was like, what on earth is happening? And then I came home and he's like, we have to watch this right now. And it is a very heart-touching but very sad ending gay love story, and it is adapted from a book that I haven't read. I've only seen the movie. But we'll just keep going along. So we've been very positive, all happy. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about pet peeves with any kind of publishing, marketing trends that you see in any kind of LGBT rep that may grind your gears or that you wish could be done better, however you want to phrase it.
Time to get salty.
Yeah, for this, I was more thinking about how queer books are like reviewed or received either by fellow writers or by content creators. So like my main number one thought is my main pet peeve, I guess you call it. It's not really pet peeve because it's a legitimate issue, is white queers taking up too much space, both authors and creators, especially speaking on subjects that they're not entitled to have an opinion on and not knowing the difference between knowing when a conversation is for them and when it's not. And also, especially in writing with white queer authors taking up space in terms of like writing characters that have marginalizations that don't belong to them, which is not to say they can't do it, but not taking it as seriously as they should and fully understanding the ramifications of doing that, especially if you do it badly. Like right now, specifically, I'm thinking of these conversations that we're having right now on Twitter, if you're on book Twitter, about Wrath Goddess Sing and how that author, even though they are a white trans author, made some very interesting choices with Black trans characters in that story. And so the whole like how that like went through the writing, editing, publishing, marketing phase, and like nobody said anything about it until we're here after the book's been published. And so like that's a big problem, like white queer creators or writers not being able to recognize the implications of the things they're writing until the damage has already been done. So that's like my number one pet peeve. My other one in terms of like how queer books are reviewed is that queer characters are not allowed to be messy or make mistakes. There's still this huge misconception in the reviewing community that like queer characters have to be paragons of perfection, that they have to be proof positive of why all queer people deserve humanity, rights, love, and respect. When the fact is that we deserve those things just because we exist, and we don't have to earn them by never making mistakes or only ever making the right choices in life. No one does that anyways. Like literally no human on earth does that. So I don't know why we're expected to do that. But yeah, so that's my main concern with that, is that queer characters are not allowed to be messy, and when queer characters make mistakes, it's still seen as like a representation of the entire community. Like, oh, you're making all bisexual people look bad. You're making all pansexual people look bad. It's like, no, we're just people who make mistakes and live full lives. Then we can only represent ourselves. So I think that's a disparity in the reviewing community, is that people still fail to understand that like queer characters only represent themselves. They don't represent an entire community, and they can make mistakes and still be a decent person worthy of good, complex things. So those are my top ones.
This one I'm about to say, it's definitely a pet peeve, and it's definitely very small compared to everything Audrey just said. So Our Flag Means Death, great show, amazing, did numbers. You need a sequel. I didn't know we needed a sequel till I watched the last episode. I'm like, oh, now I know why the internet's upset that we didn't know for so long there's a sequel. June 1st happens. Guess what happens? We find out there's a sequel. And is that not the laziest thing a big publishing company can do? Just like cash in on your easy, Pride Month points. It's like, your audience deserves more than that. If you already knew you were green lighting this, why did you make them suffer? Like, it wasn't like a one-off miniseries where it would be nice if you had more. No, it is like the biggest cliffhanger I've seen in so long. So that's like just, I don't know, I get that way for a lot of representational months when everything's just like a cash grab or a thing that corporations, it's like, you're not actually doing the work. And that's like, my second pet peeve is a similar thing where, especially in adult SFF, it is criminally behind young adult publishing. And as someone who loves reading adult, not because it's better, but because authors are allowed to be weirder or not follow certain like formulas as much. Like, they're just allowed to do more. I think like publishers are just more willing to let you put together something like The Ruin of Kings or whatever and publish that. But like, to this day, you can still like only find a handful of things for any given representation. And that shouldn't be the case. We should not actually be in a situation where we have so many people crossing over. Like, yes, all these books have been great, but we should just, each of us have like 20 to 30 options that are all great and wonderful in adult SFF. And I just remember when I remember the first time I read an adult SFF book that had a male-male romance and being shocked and reminding myself, I should not be shocked that this is in here. This is just the first time it happened. And that was Song of Achilles. And then my first sapphic adult fantasy was Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. And I actually love that relationship now, having finished the trilogy. But it is such a minor part of that first book that most people don't even see it coming. That relationship blossoms into something amazing. But like, that was my first time seeing a sapphic romance on page. And that was written by, I actually don't know Robert Jackson Bennett's identity, but I think he's just a straight white guy. Like, I have nothing else in the world to tell me otherwise. So I don't know. I have this gripe with adult SFF all the time, just because for the life of me, I'm still like waiting for Orbit to release my Venezuelan fantasy novel that won't come out till next year, because there isn't one yet. I'm just like,
I want to add too, because you mentioned Song of Achilles. I pretty much only see that shelved under fiction. But you see every other I shouldn't say every other, but you see so many other mythology retellings shelved under fantasy. But then, now I'm remembering Witch's Heart has certain representation, and KKE has some representation, and those were both fantastic. And if you haven't checked them out, they're great. But I do find it interesting that when there is a big focus on there being two men together in a story, that kind of got over to the fiction section.
Well, that's a like off-topic pet peeve of mine, that when a fantasy book becomes popular enough to be mainstream, it is no longer fantasy. See Aaron Morgenstern. Like, but that's a separate conversation. But those are my, like, I don't know, small ones, I guess. And I mean, this has nothing to do with marketing or whatever, but like, so this in particular has to do with Robert Jordan. And I don't actually expect him to write queer things well in his book. I actually like it best when he pretends that they don't exist, because when he does pretend that they exist, it's horrible. But then the show had an adaptation, and I didn't bring it up because the adaptation, as Elle and I have discussed, is not very good. We have discussed that in depth on Worldhoppers. But like, the show chose to at least make it more diverse, which is like a point in its favor. And I thought it was, like I said, the show chose to make it more diverse. And then people are in the comments telling me it was on page the whole time. And I'm like, you are reaching to high heavens that this southern white man in South Carolina did not make these two lovers. That is not what happened.
Yes, I do. I kind of want to piggyback off of that, because I do think that there are certain things he's exploring with gender norms and stuff. I don't think that is something you can really argue, because he is kind of taking this shift from what you traditionally see in fantasy. And obviously those books, they're not super old fantasy, but they're older at this point. And I really don't like when people say, well, he couldn't have written it in his time because it wasn't really accepted. I'm like, are you kidding? Have you seen some of the things that were published that he could have? It's just maybe publishing didn't want it to be more on page. But I do get frustrated when we look to authors who are very popular and they're kind of like the fantasy greats that they're not necessarily ready anymore, or maybe they were popular back then, and we try to take them as if they were these really like, oh, look at, they were leading the way, and kind of putting something on them where I'm like, that's sort of taking away from people who are, I feel like, actually sort of making these important strides to, I don't know, it does frustrate me when people say like, it was really obvious that there were all of these, and it's like, if it was, I know people have said, sorry, Angela, you meant to say something, but I have seen people say like, well, I saw in an interview that he confirmed it, and I'm like, that's awesome. Could he have confirmed it in the books then? Like, because I don't know, it's like, you can't say it's super progressive and be like, well, he couldn't have done it like super openly. It's like,
but it's also a lie. Like when people say that, and people have been saying this to me about a different book where I was complaining that it wasn't diverse on the page about, and it's like, well, it was written in the 80s. It couldn't have been. I'm like, have you read Octavia Butler? Like, have you read any authors? And also, okay, so we're saying in the 90s when Robert Jordan's writing this, there are actually queer authors who wrote in the 90s in high epic fantasy. They are not talked about that much. We can barely talk about Robin Hobb, who isn't even queer, and she's very good in the 90s, right? Like, we just don't talk about those authors who write in the 90s. And just like 94, Parable of the Sower came out, which has queer characters, and then Parable of the Talents comes out a couple years after that. People just like pretend that that's the case, and it's like, you've done no research. Like you've literally done not the bare minimum of a Google to look.
Well, it's like, and if you look at, I haven't read it, but Sean, my husband, loves it, Invisible Man. If you look up when that was written, the fact that it did it win the Pulitzer? And in the time it did, because it's very, like, it's not in regards to LGBT things, but more about being Black in America. But it's kind of shocking that it was so, and that's one that genuinely, it's surprising given what was happening in America at the time, that it is actually kind of shocking. But it's like, if that was coming out, I mean, I feel like it's a little disingenuous to pretend like they couldn't have made things a little more obvious.
Yeah.
And then also, Rodger, when did Laurel K. Hamilton write those? Those aren't brand new, right?
She's been writing them since the late 80s.
Yeah. And Audrey, weren't you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what both you and Elle were saying, that it's hilarious to me when people are like, these authors could never have written queer representation in their time. Because it's like, of course, Octavia Butler, like you cited, is an obvious example, but also like Ellen Kushner, Swordspoint, 80s, extremely explicitly gay. Like, I literally don't know what you're talking about. People just love to make excuses for like why queer rep and queer people can't exist.
Yeah. And I even get on Octavia Butler's case for her Xenogenesis series. Like, she's not perfect. It's just when someone was I was talking about Handmaid's Tale specifically, and in particular, the Testaments. I have a Testaments rant review that I seriously think about private in comments because it brings out the worst in people. But I was saying how the show chose to make it diverse, yay, and then the Testaments, which is an adaptation based off the show, not the book. Like, it's a weird triangle of a situation. It's not a very good book, but chose to get away the diversity. And I'm like, well, why'd you do that? And it's like, well, in the original, everyone was white. And I don't think they were. I think it was a case of the author never explicitly says anyone's race, so we all assume everyone's white. You know, like that whole thing. But regardless, they pivoted to, well, it was the 80s. What could she have done? And I'm like, I literally just read a 1980s dystopian by an author who chose to have Black, Asian, white people. And in that book, my one critique was she assumed a very heteronormative situation and did not explain it, where it could have been chosen that the people in the situation were picked to be heteronormative for the situation or something like that. But that was the thing. But it looked like she grew as an author by the time I got to Parable of the Sower and started incorporating it. So no author is perfect, but like to pretend that like they just didn't know these people existed. Like also in the 80s, we had like a huge epidemic that was affecting gay people. We knew gay people were real. Like this wasn't like.
I think what could be a more fair and accurate thing is to say, you know, maybe at that time when they were writing things, by today's standards, they're maybe not as accurate, or maybe like the portrayal wasn't quite as good as you'd hope. That I think would be a fair thing to say. Like, they were trying at that time. You didn't really have social media. You didn't have maybe as much to make it as easy to hear from other voices. So that would be maybe, I feel like, an understandable level of forgiving, but to just be like, look at how they were ahead of their time. I mean, where do they know? So.
Well, anyways, Chris, I'm good.
Angela ranted a lot.
Is everyone okay? Just need to check before we go further into the salt. Sort of piggybacking off what Audrey was saying with queer characters or LGBTQIA plus characters having to be clean, I think my biggest pet peeve is that even today, and it is getting a lot better, particularly in the self-published world, there's a lot more, queer representation, is that the need to put queer characters in a box and to have them fit tropes and stereotypes so that people really know that they're some part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So you've got things like, and for me being trans, I see if trans people, and I don't read YA, so I don't know if it's a lot better within the YA sphere, but trans people being binary trans people, and we don't have a lot of conversation around agender people, non-binary people, which is why I really like the Bone Ship so much. But I still think that's a conversation that's not being had all that much because it's not clean cut. I'm a binary trans person, so I understand that experience, but I think there needs to be more mess and more conversations about what transition can be for different people. And likewise with, I don't, have a specific example, but when you're reading a male-male romance, they have to be super buff, or they're like Twinkie, or it doesn't really go out of the scope of the stereotype. And I would like to see more queer people be represented in more diverse ways, rather than being like, well, they're gay because they're hot. Like, it's, that's a conversation that I'd like to see more in literature. That's probably my biggest one.
I think I get very frustrated with how much, because fantasy, I would say especially, like what Angela was saying, adult science fiction fantasy, it's because of the fact that it's not maybe as with the times. When they do have a character who is LGBTQ, they hit so hard in the marketing, and they will be like, they'll market it as if it is like an LGBTQ book. And I recently read Girl Serpent Thorn. I don't know if anyone's read that. And I'm not trying to, the thing is, I don't know how much the authors get to control what the marketing says about the books, but that one had like a very small female romance, and most of the book it was her with a man, and the female romance was like, you're almost like, is that happening? And it wasn't really confirmed until the very end. And so it didn't really feel, because it was very much marketed as like this kind of a romance in this subplot, and it wasn't really. And then I know like City of Dusk, I appreciated, I mentioned that one earlier, Rodger and I talked about this, I appreciated how there's just so much that was so open, and that I thought that was great, but the marketing did, I think, hit very hard. Like, that was going to be a major plot point, and it's like, no, it's just how people are in this world, which I'm happy about. I like that you get to just see characters being characters and being,
but they're like minor side characters.
Some of the main characters too,
not the ones that get the most page time.
The one
or the
girl,
male romance is like maybe hinted at, maybe in
that
book
one,
2.
yes.
Like,
but the girl, there is a girl who's in a relationship with a guy, but she's clearly also into women, but you don't really see her with women in that book. But there's also a character who's trans that is a side character, but then that character's sibling isn't really attracted to people in that fashion the same way. So there is a lot of exploring different kinds of levels of attraction and things like that. But I do think that the marketing was like, oh, let's hit really hard. So it does bother me when I feel like it's a little insincere. Like, they just find anything, any little tiny crumb and they're like, look, and they'll put it on lists and stuff. Another one, I kind of touched on this earlier, and this isn't just in regards to this, but also to do with all forms of diversity, it would seem, or any kind of character that is not the norm in a story. I was touching on this before about how it has to be this tragic thing. And I think it's really important that we still, of course, have those stories that are exploring why, like how difficult it can be and the sort of hatred that people have to face. I think that's important because it's oftentimes it's very true of someone's experiences. However, I also think we need more of just happy people being heroes, and they're not maybe the norm. And I think when you write constantly, I know my friend Jess Owens has talked about this too. If you have the Black character that is always facing racism and they're always having to overcome, and you have the gay character with the tragic, like one of them dies in the end, you have all these sorts of stories that we've seen so often, you kind of start Jess said it great the other day in a video, like when you have the Black character that's always facing racism, but then you market this as like Black girl magic, then it's like, is this written for me? Because I want to see myself being this amazing, awesome, heroic person. And it's sometimes exhausting to have to, like she was saying, I know what this is like. I experience it. I don't know that I want to have to experience it every single time I pick up a book with a character that looks like me. And so I think that that's true in the case of LGBTQ as well. Like we need to see more of those happy relationships, the loving relationships, but then also the whole like them just being people who are flawed, or maybe people who are just ordinary. That's another thing too, is that they're not absolute perfection, and they're just people because, you know, so many of the rest of us get to see ourselves being flawed. We get to see the moral grayness, and you don't get to see that, it feels like, as often with other kinds of stories.
Back to your like marketing thing, because the book I thought about when you said that is and I think this book's actually better than one you mentioned in terms of its representation, but I still felt misled by its marketing, and that's Gideon the Ninth, where it just like shouts to the world lesbian necromancers in space.
Yeah.
Which, like, sure, technically, but like I guess then I expected the romance to be the bigger subplot, and it was kind of there. And I think the series develops more, but actually in that marketing I get more mad about the fact that it pretends to be a sci-fi book. But in general, I just felt misled, and I'm like, why didn't you just tell me what this book was so I could like. And I know a lot of people didn't like the marketing for Docile, which was another book by a trans author that had LGBTQ rep. That's a very dark book, but was not marketed in the correct way for the material in it, because they were trying to make it, I don't know, something that it wasn't. Like, it's an incredibly dark book. Like, and I think they were trying to make it like an enemies to lovers fun romp time, which is not what that is. So, yeah,
I have another pet peeve that I just want to shout out really fast.
Yeah.
I wish it did not take tragedies in the real world for publishers to publish works that, because I mean, we saw that in 2020 a lot. And like another layer to that, when it takes tragedy for people to be like, look, now we'll have our tables set aside and things like that. On top of that, they'll push so fast to get the books out because they know, oh, we can make money right now because people care about this topic right now. And they won't go through the editing probably that they really need from some of these authors, because some authors, when I interviewed Rosaria Munda, who wrote Fireborn, talked about how I think she got 7 rounds of edits for that first book she wrote. If you're not extending that same amount of time and care into crafting, getting that book to be the best it can be, you're almost setting up people. I hate when people say like, oh, well, it's just about the diversity. Like, reviewers don't actually care if it's good. They just care about the diversity. And like, no, we do care. It feels more like publishing doesn't want to take the time sometimes. So then the fault is placed on these authors rather than how much effort they put in or how much money they put into the marketing or things like that. Anyway, it just bothers me when tragedy strikes and then it's like, oh, now we'll have all of these books. It's like, you kind of probably should have them before and all the time. That would be nice. Sorry. I get frustrated by that. That's maybe more than a pet peeve. Rodger.
No, I mean, you guys have covered the main ones. Like, my main one is just that I'm tired of, especially in adult SFF, I'm tired of the gay character or the bi character being like a token character. Like, an example is I just read Throne of Grass by Sarah J. Maas, And there's a character who in one line on one page mentions maybe being bi, but like it is never discussed in any way, shape, or form ever again. It's almost like it was just like thrown in there to be like, look, I have diversity. And it's like,
it's even worse in her newest book because she went all out to make her best friends, you know, this gay couple. And then do we ever get to see them? No.
And like, and I know it's hard because it's tricky, especially with something like being LGBT, that you can't always tell from just looking at people whether or not they are how they identify. So there is some discussion to be had there, but I wish that it was more normalized in adult SFF to have more of that kind of own voices, that if you are telling tragic stories that involve LGBT people, that it kind of more mirrors your experiences. At least for a lot of the stuff that I read, when you look into the authors, they seem to be these white women from their pictures and everything that they portray in their online personas, and then they only write queer romance or male romance. And that kind of, I'm like, I try to give grace because you never know, but also like, it'd be nice to have some male romance written by a man. Just sometimes it'd be wonderful, but those are like the main things. I just hate the tokenization, and I mean, it's like any minority. They kind of sprinkle it in there for the sake of diversity so that they can throw it in their marketing that we have diversity. And then you end up disappointed sometimes, like City of Dusk is heavily marketed as a queer romance. And it's like, well, a couple of the side characters or semi-main characters, but it's not really like the focus of the story is not a queer romance. So you saying it's a queer romance. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think we could go on about all of this stuff forever. So I think maybe we'll wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining. Don't forget to get your merch with, what is it? The World Hopping Narwhal.
Wally.
What's his name?
Wally, the World Hopping Narwhal. He's very
hopefully
cute.
Hopefully you guys found some new LGBT authors or books to read about. And if you have any more recommendations, leave them in those comments and we'll come back and check them out. But thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.